A high-value mindset isn't something people usually announce. It shows up quietly in the way they think, respond, and handle everyday situations. Certain behaviors reveal how someone views responsibility, growth, time, and other people, often without them saying a single word about it. This video explores 32 behaviors that tend to signal a high-value mindset and the patterns behind the way those individuals approach life. If you enjoy long, thoughtful videos like this, like and subscribe to our channel Restwise. These videos take a lot of time to make, and your support helps keep the channel going. Now, let's begin. Walking away from opportunities that compromise your standards. Most people think a high-value mindset means saying yes to every big opportunity that shows up. A better job, a powerful connection, a chance to make more money. From the outside it looks obvious. You grab it before someone else does. You do not hesitate. Because what if this is the opportunity that changes everything? But here is the part nobody talks about. The moment you start saying yes to everything, you slowly start saying no to yourself. Think about that for a second. There are people who will walk away from deals worth thousands, sometimes even more. Not because they are lazy, not because they are scared, but because something about that opportunity quietly asks them to lower their standards. Maybe it asks them to lie a little. Maybe it asks them to tolerate disrespect. Maybe it asks them to become someone they do not actually want to be. And most people accept it anyway, because the opportunity looks too good to lose. This is where the real separation happens. A high-value mindset is not revealed when everything is easy. It is revealed when something shiny shows up that quietly demands a piece of your integrity, and most people will hand it over without even noticing. There is a psychological reason for this. Behavioral economists talk about something called loss aversion. The human brain feels the pain of losing something about twice as strongly as it feels the pleasure of gaining something. So, when an opportunity appears, the brain starts screaming, "Do not lose this. Do not miss out. This might be your only chance." That pressure can make people tolerate things they normally never would. They ignore the red flags. They tell themselves it is temporary. They say, "I will fix it later." But high-value thinkers see something different. They understand that every opportunity is not just offering a reward. It is also asking for a price. And sometimes that price is not money. Sometimes the price is your self-respect. And once you trade that away, it becomes easier to do it again. This is why walking away is such a powerful behavior. It sends a message to your own brain that your standards are not negotiable. And the brain learns from repetition. Neuroscience calls this reinforcement. Every time you protect your standards, the neural pathways that represent self-respect become stronger. You literally train your mind to expect better. The opposite also happens. Every time you accept less than you deserve, your brain adapts to that too. What once felt uncomfortable slowly becomes normal. That is how people end up trapped in situations they once promised themselves they would never accept, the job that drains them, the partnership built on manipulation, the environment where their values slowly get diluted. It never happens all at once. It happens through tiny compromises that seemed harmless in the beginning. High-value individuals interrupt that pattern early. They are willing to lose an opportunity today if it protects who they are tomorrow. And ironically, this behavior often creates more opportunities, not fewer, because when you consistently walk away from things that violate your standards, two things happen. First, you develop a reputation. People learn that you cannot be pressured into things that do not align with your values. That kind of clarity attracts better collaborations and stronger relationships. Second, you free up space. When you say yes to the wrong opportunity, it occupies your time, your energy, and your attention. That means the right opportunity cannot enter your life because you are already busy holding on to something beneath your standards. Walking away clears that space. It is uncomfortable in the moment. It might even feel risky. But over time it builds a quiet kind of power. The power of knowing that no opportunity is more important than the person you are becoming. And when someone truly has that mindset, people can feel it almost immediately. Staying calm when others try to provoke you. Some people spend their entire lives reacting. One comment ruins their mood. One insult pulls them into an argument. One disrespectful moment turns into an emotional explosion that drains their entire day. Most people do not even realize how predictable they are. All it takes is the right trigger. Someone raises their voice. Someone questions their ability. Someone throws a subtle insult in front of others. And instantly the reaction comes out. Defend yourself. Attack back. Prove them wrong. Show them you are not someone to mess with. It feels powerful in the moment. But the shocking truth is that losing control emotionally is exactly what the other person often wants. Provocation is a strategy. Some people use it consciously. Others do it instinctively. Either way, the goal is the same. They want access to your emotions. Because the moment you react emotionally, they control the direction of the situation. Think about arguments you have seen or experienced. The person who gets angry first almost always loses leverage. Their voice gets louder. Their thoughts get messier. They say things they regret. Meanwhile, the calmer person suddenly looks more rational, more credible, and more in control. Psychologists call this emotional regulation. It is the ability to experience strong emotions without immediately acting on them. And research in neuroscience shows that when someone provokes you, the amygdala in your brain activates first. This is the part responsible for fight or flight responses. It prepares your body for confrontation. But there is another part of your brain that can override this reaction. The prefrontal cortex. This area is responsible for reasoning, self-control, and long-term thinking. The problem is that the amygdala reacts instantly, while the prefrontal cortex needs a few seconds to fully engage. That tiny window is where high-value behavior lives. Most people never pause long enough for that second system to activate. They react from emotion instead of awareness. But people with a high-value mindset train themselves to stay calm inside that moment. And when you watch someone do this in real life, it is powerful. Imagine someone throws a subtle insult your way in a meeting. They question your competence in front of others. Most people immediately jump into defense mode. They interrupt. They get louder. They start explaining themselves in a rush. But someone with emotional control does something very different. They pause. Not in a weak way, in a composed way. That pause alone shifts the energy of the entire room. Because calmness in a tense moment signals something important. It signals confidence. It shows that you are not easily manipulated. It communicates that your emotional state is not controlled by someone else. This is why calm people often appear more powerful without saying much. They are not rushing to prove themselves. They are not chasing validation. They are observing the situation before deciding how to respond. And interestingly, calm responses often make provocations backfire. When someone tries to provoke you, and you refuse to react emotionally, they lose the reaction they were hoping for. The tension they created suddenly hangs in the air, with nowhere to go. It exposes their behavior. Over time, people begin to notice who is stable under pressure and who is constantly reactive. That difference shapes reputations more than most people realize. Leaders, negotiators, and highly respected individuals tend to have one trait in common. They stay composed when things get heated. Not because they never feel anger. They feel it just like anyone else. The difference is that they do not let anger control their behavior in the moment. Instead of reacting immediately, they create a small space between stimulus and response. In psychology, this space is often described as the moment where choice lives. Within that moment, you decide whether you escalate the situation or rise above it. High-value thinkers understand something most people overlook. Provocation is temporary, but the way you handle it becomes part of how people remember you. Every moment of emotional control quietly strengthens your reputation. People start seeing you as someone who cannot be easily rattled, someone who does not crumble under pressure, someone who thinks before they react. And that kind of presence carries more influence than any argument ever could. Investing time in learning while others seek distraction. Look around at what most people do with their free time. The moment the day slows down, the first instinct is escape. Open the phone, scroll through endless videos, watch something random. Jump from one distraction to the next until the brain feels numb enough to call it relaxation. Hours disappear like this every single day, and the strange part is that it feels normal because everyone else is doing it too. But here is the uncomfortable truth. The difference between people who slowly build powerful lives and those who stay stuck in the same place is often hidden inside those small invisible hours when nobody is watching. The moments when you could choose distraction or growth. Most people believe learning requires motivation. They think successful people wake up excited to study, read, or practice new skills every single day, as if discipline is fueled by constant inspiration. That is not what actually happens. People with a high-value mindset often feel the same temptation to escape that everyone else feels. They want to relax. They want entertainment. Their brain also craves easy dopamine, but they have trained themselves to recognize something important. Distraction feels good immediately, but leaves nothing behind. Learning feels harder in the moment, but quietly compounds over time. And compounding is where life-changing advantages are built. There is a concept in neuroscience called neuroplasticity. It refers to the brain's ability to reorganize and strengthen neural pathways based on repeated behavior. Every time you learn something new or practice a skill, certain neural connections become stronger and more efficient. Your brain literally rewires itself to make that skill easier in the future. But the same mechanism works with distraction. Endless scrolling trains the brain to crave quick stimulation. The attention span gets shorter. The ability to focus deeply becomes weaker. Over time, the brain adapts to shallow input. This is why many people feel restless when they try to concentrate on something meaningful. Their mind has been conditioned for constant novelty. High-value thinkers break that cycle. They understand that investing time in learning is not about becoming the smartest person in the room. It is about building leverage. Knowledge compounds like interest in a bank account. One new concept connects with another. One skill unlocks another opportunity. One insight changes how you see the world. At first, the progress feels slow. Reading a few pages, watching a lecture, practicing something small. It might not feel like a big transformation, but months later those small sessions accumulate into a level of understanding that most people never reach. Think about two people finishing the same workday. One person spends 3 hours bouncing between short videos and random content. The other spends just one of those hours learning something useful, maybe studying communication, maybe improving financial literacy, maybe developing a skill that increases their value in the marketplace. That difference looks tiny on a single day, but stretch that pattern across an entire year and the gap becomes massive. Psychologists call this delayed gratification. It is the ability to resist an immediate reward in favor of a larger future benefit. One famous study known as the marshmallow experiment showed that children who developed this ability early often experienced better life outcomes years later. Not because they were smarter, but because they learned how to manage impulses. Learning instead of distracting yourself is the adult version of that skill. It requires patience. It requires saying no to the easy entertainment that everyone else is consuming. And sometimes it even feels lonely because the path of growth is quieter than the path of constant stimulation. But there is something powerful about becoming the person who is always evolving. When you invest time in learning, you slowly build mental depth. Your conversations change. Your problem-solving improves. Your perspective expands. Opportunities start appearing in places other people cannot even see because they lack the knowledge to recognize them. And over time, people begin to notice something different about you. While others were busy escaping their boredom, you were quietly building a mind that becomes more valuable every single year. Taking full responsibility instead of blaming circumstances. There is a moment in almost every difficult situation where the mind looks for somewhere to place the blame. The boss was unfair. The timing was bad. The economy made it impossible. The other person did not support you. Something outside of you becomes the reason things did not work out. And to be honest, sometimes those things are actually true. Life is not always fair. People do make bad decisions that affect you. Circumstances can absolutely make things harder. Anyone who pretends otherwise is ignoring reality. But here is the uncomfortable shift that separates people with a high-value mindset from everyone else. They refuse to let those circumstances become the final explanation for their life. Most people do not realize how addictive blame can be. It feels relieving in the moment. The moment you point to something external, the pressure lifts off your shoulders. If the situation is not your fault, then you do not have to change anything. You do not have to confront uncomfortable truths about your decisions, your habits, or your effort. The problem is that blame also removes your power. When every outcome is controlled by outside forces, then you become someone who can only react to life instead of shaping it. Your progress becomes dependent on other people behaving perfectly or situations aligning in your favor. And that rarely happens. Psychologists often describe this difference as locus of control. People with an external locus of control believe their life is mostly determined by luck, circumstances, or other people. People with an internal locus of control believe their choices and actions have the greatest influence over their outcomes. What is fascinating is that research consistently shows that individuals with a strong internal locus of control tend to perform better across many areas of life. Career progress, emotional resilience, and long-term satisfaction all tend to be higher. Not because their lives are easier, but because their mindset keeps them focused on what they can influence. Taking full responsibility does not mean pretending the world is fair. It means refusing to surrender your agency. Imagine two people who lose the same opportunity. Maybe a promotion went to someone else. One person spends months explaining why the decision was unfair. They replay the story to anyone who will listen. They focus on the politics of the workplace, the bias of the manager, the bad timing. The other person asks a different question. What could I improve so that next time the decision becomes obvious? That question changes everything. Suddenly, the focus shifts from frustration to growth. Maybe the answer involves improving communication skills. Maybe it involves building stronger relationships. Maybe it means developing expertise that is impossible to overlook. Whatever the answer is, the individual now has direction. Responsibility creates movement. Blame creates stagnation. And interestingly, people who take responsibility often appear more confident to others, not because they claim to be perfect, but because they demonstrate ownership over their life. When something goes wrong, they analyze it instead of defending themselves. This behavior builds trust. Leaders respect it. Teammates respect it. Even competitors respect it. Think about the difference between someone who constantly says, "It was not my fault," and someone who calmly says, "I could have handled that better, and I will improve next time." One response feels defensive. The other feels powerful. Neuroscience even shows that when people believe they have control over their actions and outcomes, the brain activates regions associated with motivation and goal-directed behavior. Feeling responsible does not just change your attitude. It changes how your brain engages with challenges. You start looking for solutions instead of explanations. Of course, this mindset is not always comfortable. Taking responsibility means facing your own mistakes honestly. It means admitting when your preparation was not enough, or when your choices created the result you are experiencing. But inside that honesty is something incredibly valuable: freedom. Because the moment you accept responsibility for your life, you also accept that your future can be shaped by the decisions you make next. Circumstances may influence the path, but they no longer define the destination. And the people who truly understand that rarely stay stuck for long. Protecting your time like it's your most valuable asset. If you pay attention to how most people spend their day, something strange becomes obvious. They guard their money carefully. They think before spending $50. They compare prices. They worry about wasting it. But when it comes to time, they give it away constantly without even noticing. One random conversation that drags on for an hour. Endless notifications pulling attention every few minutes. Meetings that could have been 5 minutes, but stretch into 40. Requests from people who simply assume your time is available. And the shocking part is that many people say yes to all of it. Not because they want to, but because saying no feels uncomfortable. It feels rude. It feels like rejecting someone. So they sacrifice their time in small pieces throughout the day until the hours that were meant for their goals quietly disappear. This is where the mindset difference becomes very clear. People with a high-value mindset treat time with a level of respect that most people reserve only for money. In fact, they often treat time as even more valuable, because money can be recovered. Time cannot. Once an hour is gone, it is gone forever. Economists sometimes describe this idea using the concept of opportunity cost. Every choice you make automatically eliminates another possibility. If you spend an hour scrolling through random content, that same hour cannot be used to build a skill, strengthen a relationship, improve your health, or work toward something meaningful. Every hour has a hidden price. Most people just never calculate it. High-value thinkers do something different. They start asking a simple question before committing their time. Is this actually worth a piece of my life? That question changes how you see everything. Suddenly, the unnecessary meeting looks different. The draining conversation looks different. The constant stream of small distractions starts to feel expensive because you realize those moments are not free. They are quietly stealing the most limited resource you have. There is also a psychological reason why protecting your time is difficult. Humans are wired for social harmony. Our brains naturally want to maintain approval from others. When someone asks for your time, a small part of the mind fears that saying no might damage the relationship. So people say yes even when they do not mean it. But over time, this creates resentment. The person who constantly gives away their time starts feeling overwhelmed. Their own priorities get pushed further and further back. The day becomes reactive instead of intentional. Protecting your time is not about becoming selfish. It is about becoming deliberate. It means recognizing that every goal you care about requires focused hours to grow. Skills require practice. Health requires attention. Meaningful projects require deep concentration. None of that happens if your time is constantly fragmented. Neuroscience research on attention shows that every time you switch tasks, the brain pays a cognitive cost. It takes several minutes for the mind to fully return to a deep state of focus. If your attention is interrupted repeatedly, you never reach the level of concentration where meaningful progress happens. That is why people often feel busy all day but accomplish very little. Their time is being sliced into tiny pieces. High-value individuals build boundaries around that resource. They are selective about where their hours go. They limit distractions. They decline commitments that do not align with their priorities. And they do it calmly without feeling the need to over-explain themselves. Because they understand something important. Every hour invested in the right place compounds over time. A focused hour spent learning, building, thinking, or improving may not look dramatic in the moment. But repeated daily, those hours accumulate into expertise, achievements, and opportunities that most people never reach. Meanwhile, the person who constantly gives away their time often wonders why progress feels so slow. The difference was never intelligence or luck. It was the quiet discipline of protecting the one resource that cannot be replaced. And when someone truly begins to treat their time like their most valuable asset, their entire life starts to organize itself around what actually matters. Choosing long-term growth over short-term pleasure. There is a quiet battle happening in your mind almost every day. One voice wants comfort right now. The other wants a better life later. Most of the time, the comfortable voice wins without much resistance. You finish a long day and your brain immediately looks for relief. Easy entertainment. Junk food. Endless scrolling. Anything that delivers a quick burst of pleasure without requiring effort. And honestly, in that moment it feels deserved. You worked hard. You are tired. Your mind just wants something easy, so you tell yourself it is only for a little while. But here is the uncomfortable truth most people never stop to notice. Short-term pleasure has a strange way of quietly expanding. A few minutes turns into an hour. One small indulgence becomes a habit, and those habits slowly shape the direction of your life. This is where the difference between average thinking and a high-value mindset becomes very clear. High-value individuals are not immune to temptation. They feel it just like anyone else. Their brain still craves comfort, dopamine, and instant gratification. The difference is that they have trained themselves to see beyond the immediate moment. They ask a question that most people avoid. How will this decision affect me 6 months from now? That question changes everything, because many pleasures that feel harmless today carry a hidden cost tomorrow. Skipping a workout feels good tonight, but slowly weakens your health. Avoiding difficult work feels relaxing today, but quietly delays your progress. Constant entertainment feels enjoyable in the moment, but gradually erodes your focus and discipline. Psychologists call this delayed gratification. It is the ability to resist an immediate reward in order to gain a larger reward in the future. One of the most famous studies on this idea involved children being offered a single marshmallow with a choice. They could eat it immediately or wait and receive 2 marshmallows later. The children who managed to wait often developed stronger self-control as they grew older. Years later, many of them showed higher academic achievement and better life outcomes. The lesson was not about marshmallows. It was about the ability to pause when your brain demands immediate pleasure. Your brain is wired to chase quick rewards because of dopamine. Dopamine is the chemical that creates the feeling of anticipation and motivation when something pleasurable is about to happen. The problem is that modern life is filled with artificial sources of quick dopamine. Social media, fast entertainment, constant notifications. These things deliver pleasure with almost no effort. Over time, the brain becomes addicted to that cycle. Effort begins to feel harder. Focus becomes more difficult. Long-term goals start losing the battle against short bursts of stimulation. People with a high-value mindset recognize this pattern and refuse to let it control them. Instead of constantly asking what feels good right now, they start asking what will make my future stronger. Sometimes that means choosing the workout even when the couch looks more comfortable. Sometimes it means studying while others are relaxing. Sometimes it means investing time in building something meaningful instead of chasing temporary entertainment. And in the moment, those decisions rarely feel exciting. In fact, they often feel uncomfortable. But something powerful begins to happen when you repeat those choices. Each time you prioritize growth over immediate pleasure, you strengthen your self-discipline. Neuroscience shows that self-control behaves like a muscle. The more you practice it, the stronger the neural pathways associated with discipline become. Over time, the difficult choice starts becoming easier. Meanwhile, the rewards of long-term thinking slowly begin to appear. Your health improves, your knowledge deepens, your opportunities expand. Your confidence grows because you trust yourself to do what is necessary even when it is not easy. While others are chasing constant pleasure, you are quietly building a version of yourself that becomes more capable every year. And eventually something interesting happens. The life that once required discipline begins to produce a deeper kind of satisfaction than short-term pleasure ever could. Listening more than you speak in important conversations. In most conversations, people are not actually listening. They are waiting for the other person to pause so they can jump in with their own opinion, their own story, or their own argument. If you pay attention closely, you will notice this everywhere. The moment someone finishes a sentence, the other person immediately starts talking, often without fully processing what was just said. It feels like communication, but it is actually two people competing for space. And strangely, the person who talks the most often believes they are controlling the conversation. But in important conversations, the real advantage belongs to the person who listens. This surprises a lot of people. Society often praises strong speakers. People assume that confidence means talking clearly, explaining your point, and dominating the room with your voice. But the individuals who truly carry influence often do something different. They listen far more than they speak. Not in a passive way, in an observant way. When you listen carefully, you begin to notice details that others miss. Tone of voice, small hesitations, words someone chooses carefully, and words they avoid entirely. These subtle signals reveal what people truly think, what they fear, and what they want. Psychologists call this active listening. It is the practice of giving full attention to the person speaking instead of preparing your own response while they talk. And research shows that people who feel heard experience lower defensiveness and higher trust during conversations. In other words, when someone feels that you genuinely listen to them, they become more open to your perspective later. But most people never reach that point because they rush to speak too quickly. High-value thinkers understand that information is power in a conversation. The more someone else talks, the more insight they reveal about their intentions, their priorities, and their emotions. If you interrupt that flow too early, you lose valuable understanding. Imagine a negotiation or an important discussion at work. One person jumps in quickly, explaining their position in detail. They talk about their expectations, their strategy, their reasoning. Meanwhile, the other person stays calm and asks thoughtful questions. What usually happens next? The first person keeps talking. They reveal their concerns. They reveal what matters most to them. Sometimes they even reveal their limits without realizing it. The listener collects all of this information quietly. By the time they finally speak, they understand the situation far more clearly than the person who rushed to dominate the conversation. Listening also creates a subtle form of respect. When you give someone your full attention, without interrupting or rushing them, it signals patience and confidence. You are not desperate to prove yourself. You are comfortable observing before reacting. This calm presence changes the tone of the interaction. Neuroscience even shows that when people feel listened to, certain areas of the brain associated with reward and emotional regulation become more active. In simple terms, being heard literally feels good to the human brain. That positive feeling naturally strengthens the relationship between two people. And relationships built on understanding are far stronger than those built on constant talking. Another interesting effect of listening is clarity. When you stay silent and let someone fully express their thoughts, they often organize their ideas more clearly as they speak. Sometimes they even correct themselves mid-conversation. You might notice someone beginning with a strong statement, but after explaining their reasoning, they slowly soften their position. If you had interrupted earlier, that shift might never have happened. By listening, you allow the conversation to unfold naturally. Then, when you finally speak, your words carry more weight. People pay closer attention because you have not been filling the air with constant commentary. Your response feels deliberate instead of reactive. That kind of presence is rare. Most rooms are filled with voices competing for attention. The person who listens deeply stands out immediately. And over time people begin to notice something about them. They speak less often, but when they do, everyone pays attention. Setting clear boundaries without feeling the need to explain. There is a moment that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. Someone asks you for something you do not want to give. Maybe it is your time. Maybe it is your energy. Maybe it is a favor that quietly crosses a line you have tried to protect. Instantly your mind starts racing. How do I say no without sounding rude? How do I make sure they do not get upset? How do I explain this in a way that makes them understand? And before you even respond, you are already building a long explanation in your head. This is where many people unknowingly give away their power. They say no, but then they spend several minutes justifying it. They explain their schedule, their stress, their reasons, their circumstances. They try to soften the rejection so much that it almost sounds like an apology. The strange thing is that the more someone explains their boundaries, the more negotiable those boundaries start to sound. Because explanations invite debate. The other person hears your reasons and begins looking for ways around them. If you say you are busy, they might say it will only take a few minutes. If you say you are tired, they might say it is not that difficult. Suddenly, your clear boundary becomes a conversation where the other person tries to change your mind. This is why people with a high-value mindset handle boundaries very differently. They keep them simple, not cold, not aggressive, just clear. Instead of delivering a long explanation, they calmly state what they can or cannot do, and then they stop talking. At first, this feels uncomfortable, especially for people who are used to keeping everyone happy. Humans are wired for social approval. Psychologists describe this as the need for social belonging. Our brains naturally try to avoid conflict because acceptance from others historically increased our chances of survival. So, when someone might be disappointed by our boundary, the brain tries to repair the situation with extra explanations. But boundaries are not meant to satisfy everyone. They are meant to protect what matters to you. Think about how confident individuals respond when something does not align with their priorities. If a request does not fit their schedule, they simply say they cannot commit to it. If someone asks for something that violates their values, they calmly decline. They do not rush into a long story. And interestingly, this behavior often earns more respect, not less. When you speak with certainty, people sense that your time and energy are valuable. Your boundaries feel stable. There is no confusion about where you stand. On the other hand, when someone constantly over-explains their boundaries, it can signal uncertainty. It sounds like they are trying to convince the other person that their decision is acceptable. That subtle difference changes how people respond. There is also a psychological principle called the justification trap. The moment you provide multiple reasons for a decision, people tend to focus on the weakest one. They challenge that single detail, and suddenly your entire boundary is being questioned. But when a boundary is simple and direct, there is very little to argue with. It might sound like I will not be able to do that, or that does not work for me right now, or I am not available for that. Then silence. No long defense. No emotional tension. Just clarity. Of course, this does not mean you never explain anything. Context matters. With close relationships or collaborative work, sometimes sharing reasoning helps create understanding. But the key difference is that the explanation comes from choice, not from pressure. High-value individuals are comfortable letting a boundary exist without needing everyone to approve of it. And over time, something interesting happens. People begin adjusting their expectations around you. They learn that your time is not automatically available. They understand that your priorities are not easily moved. That quiet consistency shapes how others treat you. Because when someone protects their boundaries without apology, They send a powerful signal about how they expect to be respected. Keeping promises, even when it becomes inconvenient. There is a version of commitment that feels easy. You promise something when you are motivated, when the schedule looks clear, when the energy is high and everything seems manageable. In that moment, keeping the promise feels simple, almost automatic. But life rarely stays that convenient. A few days later, something changes. You feel tired. Your schedule fills up. A better option appears. Suddenly, the promise you made earlier starts to feel like a burden. Your mind begins looking for an exit. Maybe you can reschedule. Maybe it was not that important. Maybe the other person will understand if you back out. And this is the exact moment where character becomes visible. Most people think integrity is about big dramatic decisions, standing up for values in major moments. But in reality, integrity is usually revealed in smaller situations that nobody else even notices. It appears when a promise becomes inconvenient. Because keeping a promise when it is easy does not prove much. Anyone can do that. The real test happens when honoring your word requires effort, discipline, or sacrifice. This is where a high-value mindset quietly separates itself. People with this mindset treat their word like a form of currency. When they say they will do something, they see it as a personal contract, not just with the other person, but with themselves. And breaking that contract has a cost. At first it might seem small, one canceled commitment, one excuse, one moment where you decide it is easier to walk away. But your brain is always paying attention to these patterns. Neuroscience shows that repeated behaviors strengthen specific neural pathways in the brain. Each time you follow through on something difficult, the pathways associated with discipline and reliability become stronger. But the opposite is also true. Each time you abandon a commitment because it became uncomfortable, the brain learns that your promises are flexible. Over time, this pattern shapes your identity. You either become someone who trusts their own word or someone who constantly negotiates with it. And that internal trust is more important than most people realize. When you know that you follow through on what you say, your confidence becomes grounded in evidence. You do not rely on motivation or mood. You rely on the habit of honoring commitments. This creates a quiet form of self-respect. At the same time, the people around you begin to notice something about your behavior. In a world where many commitments are casually broken, reliability becomes rare. The person who consistently keeps their promises stands out immediately. Think about the individuals you respect the most in your life. Often they share one simple trait. When they say they will do something, you believe them. There is no uncertainty, no doubt. Their word carries weight. Psychologists often connect this behavior to something called consistency bias. Humans naturally want their actions to align with their previous commitments. When someone publicly commits to something and then follows through, it reinforces their identity as a reliable person. But when someone repeatedly fails to keep their word, others begin adjusting their expectations. Invitations become less frequent. Opportunities are offered to someone else. Trust quietly fades, and trust is one of the most valuable forms of capital a person can have. Keeping promises does not mean living without flexibility. Life can create genuine emergencies or situations where plans must change. But there is a clear difference between unavoidable circumstances and simple inconvenience. High-value individuals recognize that difference. When something becomes difficult, they do not immediately look for a way out. They look for a way through. They reorganize their schedule. They push through temporary discomfort. They remind themselves that honoring their word matters more than the convenience of the moment. Because every time they keep a promise under pressure, they reinforce the type of person they are becoming. Someone whose commitments are not controlled by mood, energy, or convenience. And over time, that reputation becomes stronger than any introduction or explanation they could ever give. Accepting criticism without losing confidence. Most people believe they want honest feedback. They say they are open to criticism. They say they want to improve. But the moment someone actually points out a flaw, something inside them immediately tightens. The body becomes defensive. The mind starts searching for a counterargument. Instead of listening to the feedback, they start protecting their ego. It happens almost instantly. Someone questions your work. Someone points out a mistake. Someone suggests that you could have handled something better. And before the person even finishes speaking, your brain begins building a defense. You explain why it happened. You mention the pressure you were under. You remind them about everything you did right. On the surface, it looks like confidence. But in reality, it is often insecurity trying to protect itself. Because true confidence does not collapse when someone highlights a weakness. In fact, people with a high-value mindset often react to criticism very differently. Instead of rushing to defend themselves, they pause and listen carefully. Not because they enjoy being criticized. Nobody enjoys that feeling. But because they understand something important. Information is valuable, even when it is uncomfortable. Most people forget that improvement requires awareness. If you cannot clearly see your blind spots, you cannot fix them. And the truth is that we are all blind to certain things about ourselves. Our habits, our communication style, the way our actions affect others. Sometimes the only way to see those things is through someone else's perspective. Psychologists call this the self-serving bias. Humans naturally interpret situations in ways that protect their self-image. When something goes well, we credit our ability. When something goes wrong, we often blame circumstances or other people. This bias helps protect our confidence, but it also hides our weaknesses. Constructive criticism interrupts that illusion. It holds up a mirror that most people are uncomfortable looking into. But high-value individuals learn how to separate two things that many people mix together. Feedback about your behavior is not the same as a judgment about your worth. If someone points out that your presentation was unclear, it does not mean you are incapable. It simply means there is a skill that can be refined. If someone says your communication created confusion, it does not mean you are a failure. It means there is information you can use to improve. When you view criticism through that lens, the emotional reaction changes. Instead of feeling attacked, you become curious. You begin asking questions. What specifically could be better? Where did the misunderstanding happen? What would a stronger approach look like next time? That curiosity transforms criticism into a tool instead of a threat. And interestingly, this response often surprises people. Most individuals expect defensiveness when they offer feedback. They expect arguments, excuses, or tension. When someone calmly listens and reflects instead, the conversation becomes more productive and respectful. This behavior also signals a deeper kind of confidence. It shows that your sense of self is not fragile. You do not need to pretend to be perfect in order to feel capable. You trust that improvement is always possible. Neuroscience even suggests that people who adopt a growth mindset respond to mistakes differently at the brain level. Studies have shown that when individuals believe abilities can be developed through effort, their brains show stronger activity in areas related to learning after receiving negative feedback. In simple terms, they process criticism as useful data instead of a personal attack. Of course, not all criticism is accurate or fair. Some feedback comes from misunderstanding, bias, or even insecurity from the other person. A high-value mindset does not mean accepting every opinion as truth. It means evaluating it calmly. You listen. You consider the information. If there is something valuable inside the feedback, you use it. If there is not, you let it go without letting it shake your confidence, because confidence built on growth is far stronger than confidence built on pretending you have nothing left to learn. And the people who master this balance quietly become the ones who improve faster than everyone around them, remaining consistent even when motivation disappears. There is a moment that almost everyone experiences after starting something new. At the beginning, everything feels exciting. The motivation is high, the goal feels clear. You imagine the results, and that vision creates a burst of energy that pushes you forward. You wake up early with enthusiasm. You stay focused. You tell yourself this time it will be different. But then something predictable happens. A few days later, the excitement fades. The alarm feels heavier in the morning. The work that once felt inspiring now feels repetitive. The brain starts whispering small excuses. Maybe you deserve a break today. Maybe you can start again tomorrow. Maybe the timing is not right now. And suddenly, the thing you were committed to begins slipping away. This pattern is incredibly common because motivation is emotional energy. It rises and falls depending on mood, stress, sleep, and countless other factors. Some days you feel unstoppable. Other days, even simple tasks feel exhausting. If your progress depends on motivation alone, your results will always be inconsistent. This is where a high-value mindset reveals itself in a very quiet way. Instead of relying on motivation, these individuals rely on consistency. They understand something that many people do not realize early enough. Motivation is great for starting something, but discipline is what keeps it alive. The people who actually build strong skills, strong bodies, strong businesses, or strong habits are not the ones who feel inspired every day. They are the ones who show up even when they do not feel like it. This might sound simple, but psychologically it is powerful. When you continue an action despite low motivation, your brain begins forming a stronger behavioral pattern. Neuroscience explains this through something called habit loops. When a behavior is repeated regularly in the same context, the brain gradually automates it. The action begins requiring less mental effort. Think about brushing your teeth. You probably do not wake up every morning feeling motivated to do it. You do it because it is part of your routine. The brain recognizes the pattern and executes it almost automatically. High-value individuals treat many important behaviors the same way. Working on their goals becomes part of their routine instead of something they negotiate with every day. They remove the daily debate of whether they feel like doing it, because that debate is where most people lose. The moment you start asking yourself if you are motivated enough, your brain will often search for reasons to avoid the discomfort. It will highlight how tired you are. It will remind you of easier alternatives. It will present distractions that seem far more appealing in the moment. But consistency bypasses that conversation. You simply show up. Some days the work will be excellent. Other days it might feel slow or imperfect. But the key is that the action continues, Each small step reinforces the identity of someone who follows through. Over time, this creates momentum. Psychologists often talk about identity-based habits. When a behavior is repeated long enough, it stops feeling like something you are trying to do and starts feeling like part of who you are. You are no longer forcing yourself to write, train, study, or build. You see yourself as a person who does those things, and identity is far stronger than motivation, because motivation disappears easily. A stressful week, a bad mood, or a temporary setback can wipe it out, but identity creates stability. When something becomes part of who you are, skipping it feels unnatural. That is why the people who achieve the most consistent growth rarely appear dramatic in their efforts. They are not relying on bursts of inspiration. They are simply repeating the right actions over and over again, day after day, week after week. While others start and stop depending on how they feel, they continue moving forward at a steady pace. And eventually that steady pace creates results that look extraordinary from the outside. Not because of sudden brilliance, but because they kept going long after the initial motivation had disappeared. Making decisions based on values, not social pressure. There are moments in life where the pressure is not loud, but it is everywhere. Friends are doing something. Colleagues expect a certain reaction. Society seems to move in a particular direction. No one is forcing you directly, but the message is clear. If you want to fit in, you should probably go along with it. Most people do, not because they are weak or incapable, but because human beings are naturally wired for belonging. For most of human history, survival depended on being accepted by the group. Being rejected by the tribe could mean losing protection, resources, and support. That instinct still lives inside the brain today. So when everyone around you moves one way, the brain quietly pushes you to move with them. This is why social pressure can be incredibly powerful. Imagine a group conversation where everyone is agreeing with a particular opinion. Even if you privately disagree, speaking up suddenly feels uncomfortable. Your mind begins calculating the social risk. What if they think you are difficult? What if you create tension? What if you become the outsider in that moment? So many people stay silent or simply agree. But individuals with a high-value mindset operate from a different internal compass. Instead of letting the crowd decide their direction, they rely on their values. Values are the principles that define what truly matters to you. Honesty, integrity, respect, personal growth, loyalty. These principles act like an internal guide that helps you navigate decisions even when external pressure is strong. When someone is clear about their values, decisions become simpler. Not always easier, but clearer. For example, imagine being in a situation where cutting a small ethical corner could benefit you financially or socially. Many people might justify it because everyone else seems comfortable doing the same thing. The pressure to blend in makes the decision feel normal. But someone who prioritizes integrity will experience that situation differently. Their internal standard becomes stronger than the external pressure. Even if the crowd moves one way, they remain aligned with their own principles. Psychologists often describe this behavior through the concept of internal versus external validation. People who rely heavily on external validation shape their choices based on approval from others. Their decisions are influenced by popularity, social acceptance, or avoiding criticism. But individuals who rely on internal validation measure their actions against personal standards. They ask themselves whether a choice aligns with who they want to be. not just whether it will be approved by the group. This difference might seem subtle, but it dramatically affects long-term direction in life. Social pressure is constantly changing. Trends shift, opinions evolve. What is popular today might be criticized tomorrow. If your decisions are built entirely on what others expect, your identity becomes unstable. You are always adjusting yourself to match the environment. But when decisions are rooted in values, there is stability. Even when the world changes around you, your principles remain consistent. That consistency creates a sense of self-respect that does not depend on applause or approval. And interestingly, people eventually recognize this quality. Someone who stands by their values even under pressure often earns a deeper form of respect. At first it might create disagreement or surprise, but over time people begin to see that this person cannot be easily influenced by trends or group expectations. They are grounded. Of course, making value-based decisions does not mean rejecting every opinion around you. Listening to others, learning from different perspectives, and adapting when you gain new understanding are all important parts of growth. But the final decision still passes through your own filter. Does this align with what I believe is right? Does this move me closer to the person I want to become? When those questions guide your choices, social pressure loses much of its power, and you begin building a life that reflects your principles instead of the expectations of the crowd. Being selective about who gets access to your energy. Not everyone deserves access to your energy, but most people live as if everyone does. They answer every message immediately. They engage in every conversation. They absorb every complaint, every drama, every emotional storm that passes near them. By the end of the day, they feel exhausted, but they cannot clearly explain why. The reason is simple. Energy was being spent all day, but very little of it was invested intentionally. Many people think about protecting their time, but they forget that energy is just as valuable. Two people can have the same 24 hours in a day, yet one person ends the day feeling productive and focused, while the other feels mentally drained. The difference often comes down to who and what they allowed to consume their attention. Energy is deeply connected to attention. Neuroscience shows that the brain has a limited capacity for focused mental processing. Every interaction, every conversation, and every emotional exchange requires cognitive resources. When those resources are constantly being pulled in different directions, your ability to think clearly and work effectively begins to weaken. This is why some interactions leave you feeling motivated, while others leave you feeling heavy. Certain people challenge you in a healthy way. They discuss ideas, goals, progress. Conversations with them often expand your thinking. You walk away feeling sharper or inspired to act. Other interactions do the opposite. The conversation circles around complaints, negativity, gossip, or unnecessary drama. Instead of creating momentum, it drains it. After a while, you notice that your mood and focus begin dropping just from being around that energy. Most people tolerate this pattern without questioning it. They assume they must be available to everyone. If someone wants to talk, they talk. If someone wants attention, they give it. Saying no feels uncomfortable, so the cycle continues. But people with a high-value mindset approach energy differently. They are selective, not in a cold or arrogant way, in a deliberate way. They understand that attention is a resource that directly shapes their life. The people you spend time with influence your thinking patterns, your emotional state, and even your habits. Psychologists often refer to this as emotional contagion. Humans unconsciously absorb the emotional tone of the people around them. If the environment is filled with negativity or constant stress, your brain slowly begins mirroring those patterns. On the other hand, spending time with focused positive and growth-oriented individuals often raises your own level of thinking. Because of this, high-value individuals become careful about who receives consistent access to their attention. They still treat people with respect. They still listen when necessary, but they avoid getting pulled deeply into relationships or conversations that repeatedly drain their mental and emotional resources. You might notice them setting quiet boundaries. They limit time in environments where negativity dominates. They reduce engagement with people who constantly bring drama into every interaction. They choose meaningful conversations over endless small talk that leads nowhere. At first, this can feel uncomfortable because it goes against a social habit many people learn early in life. Being constantly available often feels like the polite thing to do. But availability is not the same as generosity. True generosity comes from a place of strength. When your energy is protected, you have more presence to give to the people and projects that truly matter. Your attention becomes deeper. Your conversations become more meaningful. Your work becomes more focused. Instead of scattering your energy across dozens of draining interactions, you invest it where it actually creates growth and connection. And over time, this selectiveness changes the quality of your environment. The more you protect your energy, the more your life begins to fill with people and experiences that support your direction instead of constantly pulling you away from it. Because when someone learns to treat their energy as a valuable resource, they stop letting the world decide where it goes, solving problems instead of complaining about them. Everyday people encounter small frustrations, a mistake at work, a delay in plans, a difficult colleague. Something goes wrong, and almost instantly the reaction appears. Complaining, talking about how unfair it is, replaying the situation again and again with anyone willing to listen. For a moment it feels good. Complaining releases emotional tension. It gives the brain a quick sense of validation because someone else might agree that the situation is frustrating. That small moment of agreement creates a brief feeling of relief. But here is the strange part most people never notice. Nothing actually improves. The problem remains exactly where it was. The only thing that changed is that more time and energy were spent talking about it. Complaining has become so normal in everyday conversation that many people treat it like a natural response to difficulty. But individuals with a high-value mindset approach problems from a completely different angle. Instead of asking who caused the problem, they ask, how can this be solved? That shift in thinking is simple, but it changes everything. When the brain focuses on complaints, it enters a loop of negative attention. Neuroscience research shows that repeatedly focusing on negative situations strengthens neural pathways associated with stress and frustration. The brain becomes more efficient at spotting problems and less practiced at generating solutions. Over time, this creates a mindset where every obstacle feels bigger than it actually is. But when someone intentionally shifts toward problem solving, the brain activates a different system. The prefrontal cortex begins analyzing possibilities. Instead of repeating the story of what went wrong, the mind starts scanning for options. What can be adjusted? Who can help? What action could move this forward? This process creates a sense of control, even when the situation is difficult. Imagine two people dealing with the same frustrating issue at work. One person spends the day explaining to everyone how poorly the system works and how inconvenient the situation is. The frustration spreads through every conversation. By the end of the day, nothing has changed except the overall mood. The second person notices the same problem but immediately begins thinking about solutions. Maybe there is a more efficient process. Maybe communication needs to be clarified. Maybe a small adjustment could prevent the issue from repeating. Even if the solution is not obvious at first, their attention remains directed toward improvement instead of frustration. Psychologists often describe this mindset through something called solution-focused thinking. Instead of analyzing problems endlessly, the brain looks for the smallest step that could improve the situation. That step creates movement, and movement often reveals the next step. This approach does not mean ignoring real frustrations. Some problems are genuinely difficult. Some situations are unfair, acknowledging that reality is important. But staying trapped in complaint mode rarely creates progress. High-value individuals understand that attention is one of the most powerful tools they have. Wherever attention goes, energy follows. If attention stays locked on the problem, energy drains into frustration. If attention shifts toward solutions, energy begins building momentum. And people notice that difference quickly. In environments where everyone is complaining, the person who begins asking solution-oriented questions stands out immediately. Instead of adding more negativity, they bring direction. Instead of amplifying the frustration, they look for the path forward. Over time, this behavior builds a powerful reputation. When challenges appear, people naturally turn toward the individuals who focus on solutions rather than excuses. Leaders, problem solvers, and innovators often share this same trait. They refuse to spend all their energy describing the obstacle. They focus on what can be done next, because every minute spent complaining is a minute not spent improving the situation. And the people who understand that quietly become the ones who move forward, while everyone else is still discussing the problem. Staying humble while quietly improving yourself. Some people feel the need to announce every improvement they make. The moment they start learning something new, the moment they begin making progress, the moment they achieve a small win, it immediately becomes a conversation. They talk about the books they are reading, the habits they are building, the plans they are working on. From the outside, it can sound impressive, but often something subtle is happening beneath the surface. The attention they receive from talking about progress begins to replace the satisfaction of actually making progress. The recognition becomes the reward. And once recognition becomes the reward, the motivation to quietly keep improving can slowly fade. People with a high-value mindset take a very different approach. They focus far less on announcing their growth and far more on continuing it. They understand that improvement does not need an audience. In fact, some of the most powerful growth happens in silence. Early mornings when nobody else is watching. Late nights spent practicing a skill. Hours invested in learning, refining, and correcting mistakes that never appear on social media or in conversations. These quiet efforts often look ordinary in the moment, but over time they compound into something extraordinary. Humility plays a big role in this process. When someone stays humble, they leave space in their mind for learning. They do not assume they already know everything. They are willing to listen, observe, and absorb information from many different sources. Psychologists often connect humility with something called a growth mindset. This is the belief that abilities are not fixed traits but skills that can be developed through effort and learning. When someone believes improvement is always possible, they naturally stay curious. They remain open to feedback. They look for ways to get better instead of ways to prove they are already good enough. The opposite mindset can quietly block growth. When someone becomes overly focused on appearing successful, they start protecting that image. Admitting mistakes becomes uncomfortable. Learning from others feels threatening because it might expose gaps in their knowledge. Instead of improving, they begin defending their current level. Humility removes that barrier. It allows someone to say, "I still have more to learn." That simple attitude creates a constant flow of progress because the person never stops refining themselves. Interestingly, neuroscience shows that curiosity and learning activate the brain's reward system. When people engage in activities that expand their knowledge or skills, dopamine is released in a way that encourages further exploration. Over time, the brain begins associating improvement itself with satisfaction. This means the act of getting better becomes enjoyable, not just the outcome. High-value individuals often build their lives around this quiet cycle of growth. They read without needing to mention every book. They practice skills without needing applause. They adjust their habits without announcing a complete life transformation. And because their focus stays on improvement instead of attention, their progress tends to be steady. Another powerful effect of humility is that it keeps ego from interfering with relationships. People who constantly try to prove their superiority often create tension in conversations. They interrupt, they compete, they turn discussions into performances. But someone who stays humble listens more. They show respect for other perspectives. They are comfortable learning from people regardless of status or background. This attitude attracts stronger relationships because others feel valued rather than overshadowed. Over time, the person who quietly keeps improving begins to stand out in ways that cannot be easily explained. Their knowledge deepens, their skills sharpen, their perspective matures, and people start noticing the results even though the person never spent time advertising the process. Because real growth has a way of revealing itself without needing constant announcement. Showing discipline in private, not just in public. There is a version of discipline that looks impressive in front of other people. Waking up early when others can see it. Talking about your routines. Posting progress. Showing everyone how focused and committed you are. In those moments, discipline almost becomes a performance. And to be fair, external accountability can be helpful. When people know others are watching, they often push themselves harder. The pressure to maintain an image creates motivation. But the real test of discipline happens in a much quieter place. It happens when nobody is watching. Late at night when the house is silent and no one would notice if you skipped the work. Early in the morning when the alarm rings and there is no audience to impress. Moments where the easier choice is completely invisible to everyone except you. Those are the moments that reveal the truth. Because discipline, built only for public display, is fragile. The moment the attention disappears, the behavior often fades with it. The person was never truly committed to the habit. They were committed to the recognition that came with it. High-value individuals approach discipline differently. They understand that the most important habits are not the ones people see. They are the ones practiced consistently in private. The hours spent learning when no one is asking about it. The workouts completed without posting a single update. The work done quietly, even when no one is checking your progress. This kind of discipline builds something deeper than reputation. It builds self-trust. Psychologists often talk about the concept of intrinsic motivation. This is the drive that comes from internal satisfaction rather than external rewards. When someone acts because the behavior aligns with their personal standards, the motivation becomes more stable. External validation can disappear at any moment. Applause fades, attention shifts, but internal standards remain. Neuroscience supports this idea as well. When actions are repeated consistently, the brain begins forming strong habit pathways through a structure called the basal ganglia. These pathways allow behaviors to become automatic over time. The more often you repeat a disciplined action, the less mental effort it requires. But that process only happens through repetition, and repetition usually occurs far from public attention. Consider the people who master difficult skills: musicians, athletes, writers, entrepreneurs. The performances that others admire often represent only a small fraction of the work involved. Behind that visible success are thousands of quiet repetitions, practice sessions, study hours, problem-solving attempts that happen without applause. The public sees the result, the discipline lived in private. This is why people with a high-value mindset focus less on appearing disciplined and more on actually being disciplined. Their habits are not dependent on being seen or praised. They continue whether anyone is watching or not. There is also something psychologically powerful about this kind of privacy. When you complete difficult tasks without broadcasting them, the reward becomes internal. You feel the satisfaction of knowing you kept your standard. You honored the commitment you made to yourself. That internal reward strengthens identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who follows through, someone who does the work even when it is inconvenient or invisible. Over time, that identity becomes more important than any external recognition, and interestingly, people eventually notice the results anyway. Consistent private discipline leads to visible outcomes. Skills improve, opportunities increase. Confidence becomes more grounded because it is supported by real effort rather than public approval. But by the time others notice, the person practicing those habits was never chasing attention in the first place. They were simply doing what needed to be done, even when no one else was there to see it. Letting your results speak instead of seeking validation. A lot of people feel a constant need to prove themselves. They explain their plans to everyone around them. They talk about the projects they are starting, the goals they are chasing, the things they are about to accomplish. Every idea becomes a conversation. At first it feels motivating. When you share your plans, people might react with excitement. They might say that sounds amazing or that is impressive. That reaction gives the brain a small reward. It feels like progress, even though nothing has actually been built yet. And that is where something interesting begins to happen. The brain starts enjoying the recognition more than the work itself. Psychologists have studied this pattern for years. When people publicly announce their goals, the positive feedback they receive can create a premature sense of achievement. The brain releases dopamine because it feels like the identity of success has already been acknowledged. But that feeling can quietly reduce the urgency to do the difficult work that actually produces the result. High-value individuals understand this trap, which is why many of them speak less about their ambitions and focus more on execution. Instead of constantly explaining what they are planning to do, they put their attention into building something real. They work on the project, They improve the skill. They refine the process. Often very few people know what they are doing while it is happening. From the outside, it might even look like nothing special is going on. But behind the scenes, the effort continues. This approach reflects a deeper kind of confidence. When someone is secure in their direction, they do not feel a constant need for validation. They do not require everyone to approve of the plan before they start moving forward. They trust the process enough to let the results arrive in their own time. This does not mean they never share anything. It simply means the order is different. The work happens first. The results appear. Then the story becomes visible. Think about how powerful that feels in real life. Someone quietly improves their craft for months or even years. Then one day their work suddenly gets attention. People see the finished product, the skill, the achievement. What looked like overnight success was actually the outcome of long periods of silent effort, because results carry a kind of credibility that words rarely achieve. Anyone can describe a goal. Anyone can explain what they plan to become. But when someone consistently produces results, their actions remove the need for explanation. The evidence is already there. There is also a psychological advantage to this quiet approach. When you are not constantly sharing your goals with everyone, you create mental space to experiment and adjust. You can make mistakes without feeling like you are failing in front of an audience. You can change strategies without needing to defend every decision. That freedom encourages deeper focus. Your energy stays directed toward improvement instead of managing other people's opinions. Over time, something interesting happens as well. When you stop chasing validation, you begin to value progress more than applause. The satisfaction comes from solving problems, learning new skills, and seeing real improvement. And ironically, this mindset often attracts more recognition in the long run. People notice individuals who consistently deliver results without constant self-promotion. It creates a sense of credibility and quiet authority. Instead of hearing about potential, others see tangible outcomes. Opportunities tend to follow that kind of reliability, because in a world where many people are busy announcing what they hope to do, the person who simply shows up with real results stands out immediately. Planning your future instead of drifting through life. Most people wake up, go through their day, handle whatever appears in front of them, and repeat the same cycle tomorrow. Work, errands, conversations, small distractions, occasional entertainment. Days turn into weeks, weeks turn into years, and somehow life keeps moving without a clear sense of direction. Nothing dramatic feels wrong in the moment, but something subtle is happening underneath. When you are not actively planning your future, you slowly start drifting into whatever path circumstances create for you. Opportunities appear randomly. Decisions are made quickly without long-term thinking. Habits form based on convenience rather than intention. Before you realize it, years have passed, and you are living a life that was never consciously designed. It simply happened. This is more common than most people realize, because planning your future requires something uncomfortable. It forces you to pause and ask questions that many people avoid. Where do I actually want my life to go? What kind of person do I want to become? What will my days look like 5 or 10 years from now? These questions sound simple, but they require honesty and clarity. And clarity can be intimidating because once you see the direction you want, you also see the distance between where you are and where you could be. So many people choose to stay busy instead of thinking deeply. But individuals with a high-value mindset approach life differently. They understand that direction shapes outcomes far more than random effort. Psychologists often talk about the reticular activating system, a network in the brain that filters the enormous amount of information we encounter every day. This system decides what deserves your attention and what can be ignored. When you define clear goals and plans, this system begins highlighting opportunities connected to them. You start noticing resources, ideas, and connections that were always there but previously invisible. In other words, clarity changes what your mind sees. Imagine two people walking into the same room full of conversations, ideas, and possibilities. One person has no clear direction. They simply observe what happens and react to whatever appears interesting in the moment. The other person has a clear vision of what they want to build in the next few years. Their brain automatically scans the environment differently. They pay attention to conversations related to their goals. They notice people who might help them learn something valuable. They ask questions that move them closer to the direction they have chosen. Both people experienced the same environment, but one person extracted far more value from it. Planning your future also changes how you use time. When you know where you are heading, daily decisions become easier. Activities that move you closer to your goal gain priority. Distractions lose some of their appeal because they clearly lead nowhere. Without direction, everything feels equally important or equally meaningless. Another powerful effect of planning is psychological ownership. When you actively design the path you want to follow, you begin feeling responsible for building it. Your actions start aligning with the identity of someone who is shaping their life instead of reacting to it. That mindset increases motivation because the work you are doing has a visible purpose. Of course, planning your future does not mean predicting every detail perfectly. Life is unpredictable. New opportunities appear. Interests evolve. Circumstances change. But having a direction gives you something incredibly valuable, a compass. Even when the path becomes complicated, you still know where you are trying to go. Adjustments can be made without losing the overall vision. People who drift through life often wait for something to push them forward. A crisis, a deadline, a sudden opportunity that forces a decision. But those moments are reactive. High-value individuals create direction before those moments arrive. They take time to imagine the life they want to build, and then begin aligning their actions with that vision. And over time, that intentional approach turns the future from something uncertain into something they are actively constructing day by day. Admitting when you're wrong and correcting it quickly. Being wrong is uncomfortable. The moment you realize you made a mistake, something inside your mind immediately tries to protect you. It searches for explanations. Maybe the situation was confusing. Maybe someone else caused the problem. Maybe the mistake was not that serious after all. The brain is very good at creating these little defenses. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. When our actions conflict with the way we see ourselves, the mind feels tension. If you believe you are competent, careful, and intelligent, admitting a mistake suddenly challenges that identity. So the brain tries to reduce the discomfort by justifying what happened. That is why so many people struggle to admit when they are wrong. They delay it. They soften it. They redirect the blame somewhere else. Sometimes they even ignore the mistake entirely and hope it disappears with time. But people with a high-value mindset approach mistakes from a very different angle. Instead of protecting their ego, They protect their growth. When they realize they are wrong, they acknowledge it quickly and begin correcting it. Not dramatically, not with unnecessary shame, but with clarity. Yes, that was a mistake. Here is how I will fix it. This response might seem simple, but it requires a strong form of confidence, because admitting you are wrong means you are secure enough in yourself to face reality without distortion. Your identity is not built on the illusion of being perfect. It is built on the willingness to improve. Ironically, this behavior often increases the respect others have for you. Think about the people you trust most. They are rarely the ones who pretend they never make mistakes. They are the ones who own their actions when something goes wrong. When they recognize an error, they address it directly instead of hiding from it. That honesty builds credibility. In professional environments especially, the ability to admit mistakes quickly can prevent small problems from turning into major ones. When someone delays acknowledgement, the issue often grows larger. More time passes. More people become affected. The correction becomes more complicated. But when someone immediately takes responsibility, the solution often becomes much simpler. There is also a cognitive advantage to this mindset. When you admit mistakes without resistance, your brain becomes more open to learning from them. Neuroscience research shows that recognizing errors activates brain regions involved in adaptation and improvement. The mind begins analyzing what went wrong and how to prevent it in the future. But that learning process only happens if the mistake is acknowledged. If the brain stays focused on defending the ego, the lesson never fully forms. People with a high-value mindset treat mistakes as information. They do not celebrate failure, but they do extract insight from it. What assumption was incorrect? What signal was ignored? What could be done differently next time? Each correction becomes a small upgrade in their decision-making. Over time, this approach accelerates growth because it removes the fear surrounding being wrong. Instead of avoiding difficult situations where mistakes might happen, they engage with challenges more openly. They know that even if something goes wrong, they will handle it honestly and adjust quickly. Another powerful side effect is psychological freedom. When you stop trying to maintain the image of always being right, you free your mind to think more clearly. Conversations become more productive. Debates become less about winning and more about finding the best answer. That openness creates stronger collaboration with others because people feel safe sharing ideas without constant defensiveness. And interestingly, the individuals who admit mistakes quickly often end up making fewer of them over time, not because they are magically more careful, but because they learn from each error instead of wasting energy trying to hide it. Staying focused when others are easily distracted. If you watch how most people work today, something becomes very obvious. Their attention is constantly moving. A few minutes of work, then a quick check of the phone. A message pops up, so they respond. Another notification appears, so they glance at it. Before they realize it, they have jumped between 10 different things without finishing any of them. The strange part is that it feels productive. The brain stays busy all day. Emails are answered. Messages are sent. Small tasks are completed. But when the day ends, the important work that actually moves life forward often remains untouched. This is the hidden cost of distraction. Modern environments are filled with tools designed to capture attention. Social media feeds, constant notifications, short videos, endless updates. Each one is built to trigger the brain's curiosity so that you check it again and again. Neuroscience explains why this works so well. Every time you encounter something new or interesting, the brain releases a small amount of dopamine. Dopamine is the chemical that drives curiosity and anticipation. It encourages you to keep looking for the next piece of information, the next update, the next moment of stimulation. This is why scrolling through a feed can feel strangely addictive. But there is a trade-off. Every time your attention shifts, your brain has to reset. Psychologists call this context switching. When you move from one task to another, your mind does not instantly return to full focus. It takes several minutes to rebuild the same level of concentration you had before the interruption. If distractions happen every few minutes, deep focus never fully forms. The result is a day filled with activity, but very little meaningful progress. People with a high-value mindset treat attention very differently. They understand that focus is one of the most powerful resources they have. While others allow their attention to be pulled in every direction, they intentionally protect it. When they work, they try to stay fully present with the task in front of them. That might mean silencing notifications. It might mean setting aside specific blocks of time where interruptions are minimized. It might mean stepping away from environments that constantly pull their attention elsewhere. These choices might seem small, but the impact is enormous. When someone stays focused on a single task for a longer period of time, the brain enters what psychologists often call a state of deep work. In this state, concentration becomes intense and distractions fade into the background. The mind begins connecting ideas more efficiently, solving problems faster, and producing higher quality results. This level of focus is where real progress often happens. Think about any complex skill or meaningful project. Writing something valuable, learning a difficult concept, building a business, creating something new. None of these tasks can be completed effectively in scattered moments between notifications. They require sustained attention. Yet sustained attention has become rare. That rarity is exactly what makes it powerful. When most people are distracted, the person who can maintain focus immediately gains an advantage. They learn faster because their brain stays engaged longer. They complete projects more effectively because their attention is not constantly interrupted. Over time, the difference compounds. While others are repeatedly restarting their concentration, the focused individual keeps moving forward in a steady line. Each uninterrupted hour builds on the previous one. Skills deepen. Ideas become clearer. Results begin to appear. There is also a psychological benefit to this kind of focus. When you stay fully engaged with a meaningful task, your mind experiences a sense of progress. That progress creates motivation. Instead of feeling scattered or overwhelmed, you feel momentum building. And momentum is powerful. It turns effort into rhythm. People with a high-value mindset are not immune to distraction. Their phones still buzz. Their minds still feel curiosity about what is happening elsewhere. But they recognize that every moment of attention has a direction, and they choose to give that attention to the things that actually move their life forward. Learning from failure without letting it define you. A failure has a strange way of changing how people see themselves. One mistake happens. One plan falls apart. One opportunity disappears. And suddenly the mind begins telling a much bigger story than the situation actually deserves. Maybe I am not good at this. Maybe I am not cut out for it. Maybe this proves I should stop trying. What started as a single setback quietly turns into an identity. This is where many people get stuck. They do not just experience failure. They start defining themselves by it. Instead of seeing a failed attempt, they see proof that they are incapable. The brain naturally leans toward this kind of thinking because it is trying to protect you from future pain. Psychologists call this the negativity bias. The human mind gives more attention and emotional weight to negative experiences than positive ones. Evolution shaped our brains this way because remembering danger helped our ancestors survive. But in modern life, that same tendency can distort how we interpret setbacks. One mistake can feel larger than dozens of successful attempts. People with a high-value mindset train themselves to respond differently when failure appears. They still feel the disappointment. They still recognize the frustration. But they separate the event from their identity. The failure becomes information instead of a verdict. Think about how this changes the way you process a setback. Instead of asking what is wrong with me, the question becomes what went wrong in the process. That small shift moves your mind from self-judgment to problem-solving. Psychologists often describe this as a growth mindset. When someone believes abilities can improve through effort and learning, failure stops looking like a permanent label. It becomes feedback, something that reveals which approach did not work and what might need to change next. Neuroscience even supports this idea. When people with a growth mindset encounter mistakes, their brains show stronger activity in regions associated with learning and adjustment. Instead of shutting down emotionally, the brain becomes curious. What can be learned from this moment? High-value individuals develop this curiosity intentionally. After something fails, they step back and analyze the situation with honesty. What assumption was incorrect? Which part of the plan was weak? What skill needs improvement? Sometimes the answer is strategy. Sometimes it is preparation. Sometimes it is simply timing. But the key is that the lesson is extracted. Without reflection, failure only produces frustration. With reflection, failure produces insight. This process also builds resilience. When you learn that setbacks contain useful information, they stop feeling like the end of the story. They become part of the path. Think about people who eventually achieve meaningful success in any field. Entrepreneurs, athletes, creators, scientists. Very few of them moved from their starting point to success without mistakes along the way. Projects failed. Experiments did not work. Opportunities disappeared. But the people who kept moving forward did one thing differently. They refused to let failure define who they were. Instead of seeing a failed attempt as proof of inadequacy, they treated it as a step in the learning process. Each mistake adjusted their approach slightly. Each setback revealed something they could improve. Over time, those adjustments created better decisions, stronger skills, and clearer strategies. Ironically, the individuals who learn the most from failure often become the most capable in the long run. Not because they avoid mistakes, but because they extract lessons from them faster than everyone else. And when failure stops being a personal label and starts becoming a teacher, the fear surrounding it begins to fade. What once felt like an ending becomes part of the path that leads forward. Giving respect without tolerating disrespect. Most people grow up hearing that respect is something you give to others. Be polite. Be kind. Treat people well. Those lessons are important, and they shape how we interact with the world. But somewhere along the way, many people misunderstand what respect really means. They start believing that being respectful requires tolerating behavior that clearly crosses a line. Someone speaks to them with sarcasm or disrespect, and they stay silent to avoid conflict. Someone repeatedly ignores their boundaries, and they continue being polite while quietly feeling frustrated. On the surface, it looks like patience, but underneath it slowly erodes self-respect. Respect was never meant to be one-sided. Healthy respect moves in both directions. You treat others with dignity, and you also expect the same treatment in return. When that balance disappears, relationships begin to feel uncomfortable and uneven. People with a high-value mindset understand this difference very clearly. They give respect freely, but they do not tolerate consistent disrespect. This does not mean they become aggressive or hostile when someone behaves poorly. In fact, their response is often calm and controlled. The difference is that they address the situation instead of ignoring it. When someone crosses a line, they acknowledge it. Sometimes that response is simple, a clear statement that a certain tone or behavior is not acceptable. Sometimes it means stepping away from a conversation that has become disrespectful. Other times it means creating distance from someone who repeatedly shows a lack of consideration. The key is that they do not allow disrespect to become normal. Psychologists often discuss this in terms of personal boundaries. Boundaries are the invisible lines that define how people are allowed to treat you. When those lines are unclear, others may unintentionally or intentionally push past them. If no response follows, the behavior often continues. But when boundaries are communicated calmly and consistently, people quickly learn what is acceptable and what is not. There is also a psychological principle called social reciprocity. Humans tend to mirror the behavior they receive from others. When someone treats people with genuine respect, many interactions naturally become more positive and cooperative. However, reciprocity works in the other direction as well. If disrespect goes unchallenged, it can slowly become the expected dynamic. High-value individuals interrupt that pattern early. They remain respectful, even when others are not. They avoid escalating situations unnecessarily. But they also make it clear that they value themselves enough to step away from conversations or environments that repeatedly cross their boundaries. This balance requires emotional control. Reacting aggressively to every slight creates chaos. Ignoring every insult creates resentment. The middle path requires awareness and composure. You acknowledge the behavior without losing control of your own. For example, if someone speaks in a dismissive tone during a discussion, a calm response might simply address it directly. The conversation can continue, but the disrespect is not silently accepted. Interestingly, people often respect this kind of calm firmness more than constant politeness without boundaries. When someone demonstrates that they value themselves, it naturally shapes how others interact with them. Over time, this approach also filters the kinds of relationships that remain in your life. People who appreciate mutual respect tend to stay. People who rely on manipulation, negativity, or disrespect often drift away because those behaviors no longer receive silent acceptance. And that shift creates a healthier environment overall. Because true respect is not about dominating others or demanding special treatment. It is about maintaining dignity on both sides of an interaction. You treat others well because it reflects your character. But you also expect to be treated with the same level of consideration. Thinking before reacting in emotional situations. Emotions move fast. Faster than logic, faster than reflection, and often faster than the words that come out of your mouth. Someone says something that feels insulting. A situation suddenly becomes stressful. A misunderstanding appears out of nowhere. In that moment, your body reacts almost instantly. Your heart rate rises, your thoughts race. You feel the urge to respond right away. Most people act on that impulse without even realizing it. They reply immediately. They defend themselves. They raise their voice or say something sharp that feels justified in the moment. For a few seconds it feels powerful because the emotion has been released. But then something else often follows. Regret. Words spoken in emotional moments have a strange ability to create problems that did not exist before. A conversation that could have been resolved calmly suddenly becomes an argument. A small misunderstanding turns into tension that lasts for days or even years. This is why emotional reactions can quietly damage relationships, opportunities, and reputations. People with a high-value mindset approach these moments differently. They still feel the emotion, but they create a small pause before responding. That pause may only last a few seconds, but it changes everything. Neuroscience helps explain why. When something triggers an emotional reaction, the amygdala in the brain activates immediately. This structure is responsible for detecting threats and preparing the body for quick action. It is part of the ancient survival system that helped humans react quickly to danger. But there is another region of the brain that handles reasoning and decision-making, the prefrontal cortex. This area evaluates consequences, considers context, and helps you choose a response instead of simply reacting. The problem is that the amygdala activates faster than the prefrontal cortex. If you react instantly, your response is likely coming from emotion rather than thoughtful judgment. But when you pause, even briefly, you give the prefrontal cortex time to engage. That small delay allows your mind to ask better questions. What is actually happening here? Is this worth escalating? What response would create the best outcome rather than the most immediate satisfaction? This ability to pause becomes a powerful form of emotional intelligence. Imagine someone criticizing your work during a meeting. An immediate reaction might involve defending yourself aggressively or pointing out their mistakes in return. The conversation quickly becomes tense and unproductive. But if you pause, the situation can unfold differently. You might ask a clarifying question. You might acknowledge the feedback while explaining your reasoning calmly. The tone of the discussion stays constructive rather than turning into conflict. The same principle applies in personal relationships. Emotional reactions often escalate small issues into larger arguments, but thoughtful responses tend to reduce tension instead of increasing it. Psychologists sometimes describe this ability as response flexibility. It is the capacity to choose how you react rather than being controlled by your first impulse. People who develop this skill often experience stronger relationships and clearer decision-making. They avoid unnecessary conflict because they are not reacting automatically to every emotional trigger. Of course, pausing does not mean suppressing your emotions completely. Feelings are important signals. Anger can reveal that a boundary has been crossed. Frustration can show that something needs to change. But the goal is to express those emotions with awareness rather than letting them control the moment. High-value individuals understand that a single emotional reaction can shape how people see them. One impulsive comment can damage credibility that took years to build. So instead of reacting immediately, they take a breath, observe the situation, and respond with intention. That simple habit transforms emotional moments from potential mistakes into opportunities for clarity and control. Choosing meaningful work over empty business. A lot of people spend their entire day being busy. Their schedule is full, their inbox is active. their phone keeps buzzing, and there is always something demanding their attention. From the outside, it looks productive. They move from one task to another without stopping. But at the end of the day, something strange often happens. They feel exhausted, yet nothing truly important moved forward. This is the hidden trap of empty business. The brain likes activity because activity feels like progress. When you check emails, answer messages, attend meetings, or handle small tasks, you receive quick bursts of satisfaction. Something was completed. Something was crossed off a list. The brain releases a small amount of dopamine, reinforcing the feeling that you accomplished something. But not all activity creates real value. Some tasks simply maintain motion without creating meaningful results. They keep you occupied but do not improve your skills, move your goals forward, or build anything that lasts. Over time, a person can become incredibly busy while slowly drifting away from what actually matters. People with a high-value mindset learn to recognize this difference. They understand that productivity is not measured by how many tasks you complete, but by the significance of the work you focus on. Meaningful work usually looks different from busy work. It often requires deeper concentration. It might involve learning something difficult, building a project from scratch, solving complex problems, or improving a skill that will compound over time. These tasks rarely provide instant satisfaction. In fact, they can feel uncomfortable at first. Meaningful work asks for patience. It requires sustained attention and sometimes long periods where visible results are not immediate. Because of that, many people unconsciously avoid it and choose easier tasks that create the illusion of productivity. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as task substitution. When a challenging task feels overwhelming, the brain searches for simpler activities that still feel productive. Instead of working on the demanding project, you organize files, respond to minor messages, or handle low-priority details. The day fills with movement, but the important task remains untouched. High-value individuals train themselves to notice when this pattern appears. Instead of asking, "What can I do right now?" they ask, "What actually matters most?" That question shifts their attention toward work that creates long-term impact. For example, imagine someone trying to build a skill that could change their career. Practicing that skill might feel slow and mentally demanding. There is no immediate applause, no quick reward. Meanwhile, there are dozens of easier tasks available that feel productive. Answering emails, cleaning up small details, attending conversations that lead nowhere. Choosing meaningful work requires the discipline to ignore those distractions and return to the task that truly matters. Over time, this choice creates an enormous difference in outcomes. One person spends years constantly busy, but rarely moving forward. The other spends fewer hours on low-value tasks and more time building something substantial. Psychologically, this shift also creates a deeper sense of satisfaction. When you invest time into meaningful work, progress begins to accumulate. Skills improve, ideas develop, results slowly appear. The effort starts connecting with purpose. That sense of purpose is powerful because it changes how you experience effort. Instead of feeling like you are simply surviving another busy day, you feel like you are contributing to something larger than the next task on your list. And people who consistently choose meaningful work over empty activity eventually stand out, not because they appear busier than everyone else, but because the work they focus on actually builds something real over time. Valuing depth in relationships over popularity. In a world that constantly measures social success by numbers, it is easy to believe that more connections automatically mean better relationships. More followers, more contacts, more people in your circle. On the surface, it looks impressive. The phone is always buzzing, conversations are happening everywhere, and there is always someone new to meet. But numbers can be misleading. Having many people around you does not necessarily mean you have meaningful relationships. In fact, many individuals surrounded by large social circles quietly feel misunderstood or unsupported when life becomes difficult. Because there is a big difference between being known by many people and being truly understood by a few. Most people never stop to question this difference. They chase popularity because popularity brings attention. Attention feels rewarding. When many people respond to you, invite you places, or interact with your life, the brain receives small bursts of validation. Neuroscience shows that social approval activates the same reward systems in the brain that respond to other pleasurable experiences. When people like, comment, or express interest, dopamine is released. The brain begins associating visibility with satisfaction. This is why the pursuit of popularity can quietly become addictive, but popularity often encourages shallow interactions. Conversations stay light. Topics remain safe. Relationships become wide but not deep. Many people know small pieces of you, but very few understand your real struggles, your ambitions, or your fears. High-value individuals recognize that meaningful relationships operate differently. Instead of focusing on how many people they know, they focus on the quality of the connections they build. They invest time and energy into relationships that involve trust, honesty, and mutual growth. These relationships are not always large in number. In fact, they are often surprisingly few. But the depth within them makes a profound difference in life. A deep relationship allows real conversations to happen. You can share ideas, doubts, and experiences without constantly managing your image. Advice becomes honest instead of polite. Support becomes genuine instead of performative. Psychologists often refer to this as emotional intimacy. It is the ability to share your authentic thoughts and feelings with someone who listens without judgment. This type of connection strengthens emotional resilience because people no longer feel like they must carry everything alone. Research consistently shows that individuals with a few strong relationships tend to experience higher life satisfaction than those with many superficial ones. Depth creates stability. Think about the moments in life when support truly matters. Difficult decisions, personal challenges, major life transitions. In those moments, popularity rarely provides much help. The dozens of casual connections may disappear into the background. But the few people who truly understand you often remain present. High-value individuals prioritize building those kinds of bonds. They spend time nurturing trust rather than constantly expanding their social circle. They listen deeply, show loyalty, and create space for honest conversation. These relationships often grow slowly because trust requires consistency over time. Yet once they form, they become incredibly strong. This mindset also reduces the pressure to impress everyone. When you value depth over popularity, you stop trying to maintain a perfect image for a wide audience. You focus on being genuine with the people who matter most. That authenticity often attracts the right kind of connections naturally. Instead of chasing approval from many directions, your energy stays invested in relationships that truly enrich your life. And over time, those deeper connections become far more valuable than any number attached to popularity could ever be. Practicing patience. When progress feels slow, there is a moment in almost every meaningful journey when progress starts to feel painfully slow. At the beginning, everything feels exciting. You start learning a skill, building something new, improving your habits, or working toward a goal that feels important. The first few days or weeks are filled with energy, but then something frustrating happens. The results do not appear as quickly as you imagined. The skill still feels clumsy. The project is far from finished. The changes in your life are small and almost invisible. It begins to feel like you are putting in effort without receiving much in return. This is where many people quietly give up, not because the goal was impossible, but because the progress felt too slow to stay motivated. The brain begins asking uncomfortable questions. Is this even working? Am I wasting my time? Maybe I am just not talented enough. Those doubts can become powerful because the human mind is naturally drawn to quick rewards. Psychologists often talk about the brain's preference for immediate gratification. When we take an action and quickly see a positive result, dopamine reinforces that behavior. The brain learns that the effort was worth it. But when effort continues without visible rewards, the brain struggles to maintain the same level of enthusiasm. Patience becomes difficult. This is why people with a high-value mindset develop a very different relationship with time and progress. They understand that many of the most valuable outcomes in life grow slowly at first. Skills, knowledge, strong relationships, financial stability, physical health, meaningful projects. Almost all of them follow the same pattern. Early effort produces very small results. Sometimes those results are so subtle that they barely feel noticeable. But something important is happening beneath the surface. The brain is learning. Habits are forming. Systems are improving. Small improvements are stacking on top of each other, even when they are not obvious yet. This process is often described as compounding. Small, consistent efforts accumulate over time until they reach a point where the results suddenly become visible. To an outside observer, it might look like sudden success, but in reality it was built through months or years of steady work. Patience allows someone to stay in that process long enough for the compounding effect to appear. Without patience, people abandon the effort just before the momentum begins. Imagine someone learning a difficult skill. The first attempts are awkward. Mistakes happen constantly. Improvement feels painfully slow. Many people would interpret this stage as proof that they lack ability. But someone with patience views the same stage differently. They see it as the normal beginning of mastery. Each mistake becomes feedback. Each repetition strengthens understanding slightly. Over time, those small adjustments begin to create smoother performance. The same principle applies to many areas of life. Building a career, improving your health, growing a business, strengthening your mindset. The early stages often feel like planting seeds in soil that shows no immediate growth. Patience is the willingness to keep nurturing the process before the results become visible. There is also a psychological benefit to this mindset. When you accept that meaningful progress takes time, you stop measuring success only by immediate results. Instead, you start valuing consistency. Did I show up today? Did I improve slightly? Did I stay committed to the direction I chose? These small confirmations create a steady sense of momentum. People who practice patience also experience less emotional volatility. When progress slows down, they do not panic or abandon the effort. They understand that temporary plateaus are part of long-term growth. They stay focused on the process instead of chasing instant outcomes. And eventually something interesting happens. The progress that once felt invisible begins to reveal itself. Skills sharpen, results appear, opportunities open that were not available before. To others it may look like sudden success, but the truth is that patience quietly carried them through the slow part that most people were unwilling to endure. Taking care of your physical and mental well-being. There is a strange pattern that appears in the lives of many people who are constantly chasing success. They push themselves harder, work longer hours, sacrifice sleep, ignore stress, and convince themselves that taking care of their body and mind can wait until later. Later when the work slows down. Later when the goals are achieved. Later when life becomes less demanding. But later rarely arrives. Instead, the exhaustion slowly builds. Energy drops. Focus becomes weaker. Small problems start feeling overwhelming. The body sends signals through fatigue, headaches, poor sleep, or constant tension, but those signals are often ignored. Many people treat their well-being like an optional luxury rather than a foundation. People with a high-value mindset see this very differently. They understand something that is easy to overlook in a busy life. Your body and your mind are not separate from your success. They are the system that makes everything else possible. If that system is neglected, everything built on top of it becomes unstable. Think about how much your daily performance depends on energy and mental clarity. The ability to concentrate on complex tasks, the patience to deal with challenges, the emotional stability to handle stress without losing control. All of these qualities are directly influenced by physical and mental health. Neuroscience makes this connection very clear. When the body is consistently deprived of rest, nutrition, or movement, the brain's cognitive functions begin to suffer. The prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for decision-making, planning, and self-control, becomes less efficient. At the same time, the brain becomes more reactive to stress. This means poor well-being does not just affect how you feel. It affects how you think. Sleep is one of the most powerful examples of this. During deep sleep, the brain processes information, strengthens memory, and clears metabolic waste that accumulates throughout the day. Without proper rest, concentration weakens and emotional regulation becomes more difficult. Yet many people sacrifice sleep first when life becomes busy. Physical movement has a similar effect on mental performance. Exercise increases blood flow to the brain and stimulates the release of chemicals that improve mood and cognitive function. Even moderate activity can reduce stress and sharpen focus. But again, people often treat it as optional. High-value individuals approach well-being with a different mindset. They do not see sleep, movement, or mental recovery as distractions from productivity. They see them as investments that allow them to perform at a higher level for longer periods of time. Taking care of your well-being also includes the mental environment you create for yourself. Constant stress, negative influences, and endless mental noise can quietly drain motivation and clarity. Protecting your mental space becomes just as important as protecting your time. This might mean stepping away from environments that constantly create pressure or negativity. It might mean allowing your mind moments of quiet reflection instead of filling every second with stimulation. These choices may seem small, but they shape how your mind functions throughout the day. Another important aspect of well-being is emotional awareness. High-value individuals pay attention to their mental state instead of ignoring it. If stress builds up, they recognize the signal and adjust their behavior before it becomes overwhelming. They understand that resilience does not mean ignoring exhaustion. It means maintaining the strength to continue performing without burning out. Over time, this approach creates a powerful advantage. When your body is healthy and your mind is clear, you think better, act with more intention, and handle challenges with greater stability. While others are constantly running on empty, you operate with energy and focus, and that difference quietly affects every decision you make and every opportunity you pursue. Refusing to engage in gossip or negativity, there is a certain kind of conversation that appears almost everywhere. At work, in social groups, during casual gatherings, even in online discussions. It usually starts quietly. Someone mentions another person who is not present. A comment is made about their behavior, their choices, or something they did wrong. Within minutes, the conversation turns into gossip. Opinions are shared. Small details are exaggerated. Speculation fills the gaps where facts are missing. People laugh, criticize, or judge someone who has no chance to respond. For a moment, it feels entertaining. The conversation moves quickly, and everyone has something to say. But something subtle is happening beneath the surface. Gossip and negativity slowly shape the environment you spend time in. Psychologists often talk about emotional contagion, the tendency for people to absorb the emotional tone of the conversations around them. When discussions are filled with criticism, complaints, or negativity, those emotions quietly influence the mindset of everyone involved. Even if the conversation feels harmless, the brain is still processing the negativity. Over time, this can affect how people see the world. Instead of looking for ideas, opportunities, or growth, the mind becomes more focused on flaws, mistakes, and judgment. People with a high-value mindset recognize this pattern very quickly. They understand that the conversations they participate in influence their thinking more than they realize. Because of that, they choose not to engage in gossip or constant negativity. This does not mean they pretend problems do not exist. If something genuinely needs to be addressed, they are willing to discuss it directly with the person involved or approach the issue in a constructive way. But they avoid conversations that revolve around tearing others down simply for entertainment. One reason is integrity. When someone regularly speaks negatively about people who are not present, it reveals something important about their character. If they are comfortable criticizing others behind their back, it raises a simple question. What do they say when you are not in the room? High-value individuals prefer relationships built on trust and respect. Participating in gossip weakens that trust because it creates an environment where judgment replaces understanding. Another reason they avoid negativity is focus. Time and attention are limited resources. When conversations revolve around complaints or criticism, that energy is no longer available for ideas that could actually improve something. Imagine spending an hour discussing someone else's mistakes compared to spending that same hour exchanging ideas, learning something new, or solving a real problem. One conversation drains energy. The other creates value. Neuroscience also shows that repeated exposure to negative information can influence the brain's perception of reality. The mind begins scanning for more examples of what it hears most often. If someone constantly participates in negative discussions, their brain gradually becomes more sensitive to flaws and frustrations. But when conversations focus on growth, solutions, and constructive ideas, the mind begins noticing those patterns instead. High-value individuals intentionally choose the mental environment they surround themselves with. Sometimes this means redirecting a conversation when it becomes negative. Instead of adding another criticism, they might shift the topic toward something more productive. Other times it means staying quiet rather than contributing to gossip. In certain situations, it may even mean creating distance from environments where negativity has become the dominant form of interaction. At first, this can feel unusual because gossip is so common in everyday life. But over time, people begin noticing something different about those who avoid it. They appear calmer, more focused, and more trustworthy. Because when someone refuses to engage in tearing others down, their attention remains available for something far more valuable, building themselves up and encouraging the same growth in the people around them. Celebrating others' success without feeling threatened. There is a moment that quietly reveals a lot about someone's mindset. It happens when another person succeeds. A friend gets a promotion. A colleague receives recognition. Someone in your circle achieves something impressive. From the outside, the expected reaction is simple. You congratulate them, maybe smile, maybe say you are happy for them. But inside, people often feel something more complicated. Instead of pure happiness, a subtle tension appears. A quiet comparison begins forming in the mind. Why them and not me? Are they moving ahead while I stay in the same place? What does their success say about my progress? These thoughts usually happen quickly and silently. Most people never talk about them, but they are incredibly common. The brain naturally compares itself to others because it is constantly trying to measure status and progress. Psychologists call this social comparison theory. Humans instinctively evaluate their own achievements by looking at the achievements of the people around them. When someone else succeeds, the mind sometimes interprets it as evidence that there is less opportunity left for everyone else. It starts to feel like success is a limited resource. When this belief takes hold, celebrating others becomes difficult. Their achievement feels less like good news and more like a reminder of what you have not accomplished yet. But people with a high-value mindset approach this moment very differently. They genuinely celebrate the success of others because they do not see achievement as a competition with a limited number of winners. Instead, they view it as evidence that progress is possible. Someone else's success becomes inspiration rather than a threat. This mindset creates a powerful psychological advantage. When you stop feeling threatened by the progress of others, your mind becomes more open. You can observe what they did well, learn from their approach, and appreciate the effort that led to their achievement. Their success becomes information rather than intimidation. There is also an important emotional benefit to this attitude. When you celebrate others sincerely, you strengthen your relationships instead of weakening them through hidden resentment. People feel the difference between genuine support and forced politeness. Authentic encouragement builds trust. Think about how people react when someone truly supports their achievements. They remember it. They respect it. Over time, this creates stronger connections because people naturally want to be around those who uplift rather than compete with everyone around them. High-value individuals understand that life is not a scoreboard where only one person can move forward at a time. Different people succeed in different ways and at different moments. One person's breakthrough does not eliminate your opportunity to grow. In fact, being surrounded by successful individuals can raise your own standards. When you regularly witness people working hard, improving themselves, and achieving meaningful goals, It reshapes what your mind believes is possible. Their progress becomes a reminder that growth is real and attainable. This environment often creates a positive cycle. One person's success motivates another. That motivation leads to effort. Effort leads to new results. Instead of competing destructively, people begin pushing each other upward. Of course, this mindset requires confidence. When someone feels deeply insecure about their own direction, the success of others can easily trigger jealousy. But when you trust your own path and understand that progress takes time, someone else's achievement no longer threatens your identity. It simply becomes another example of what dedication and persistence can create. And the people who can genuinely celebrate the victories of others often end up building stronger networks, deeper friendships, and a healthier perspective on their own journey. Because they are not distracted by comparison. They are focused on growth, maintaining integrity even when no one is watching. There is a version of you that the world sees. The version that appears in public, at work, in conversations, in situations where your behavior can be noticed and evaluated. Most people are careful about how they act in those moments. They choose their words more carefully. They try to appear responsible, disciplined, and trustworthy. But there is another version of you that exists in complete privacy. The moments when no one is watching, no one is judging. No one would ever know if you cut a corner, ignored a responsibility, or chose the easier path instead of the right one. Those moments reveal something deeper than reputation. They reveal integrity. Integrity is often misunderstood as simply following rules or appearing honest in front of others. But real integrity is internal. It is the ability to maintain your standards even when external pressure disappears. When there is no reward for doing the right thing, no recognition, no consequences for doing the opposite. In those private moments, people face small decisions that slowly shape their character. Maybe it is the choice to complete work with care instead of rushing through it, because no one will check the details. Maybe it is being honest in a situation where lying would be easier and impossible to detect. These decisions may seem insignificant at the time, but they accumulate. Psychologists often explain behavior through the concept of identity reinforcement. Every action you take sends a signal to your brain about the kind of person you are. When you repeatedly act with honesty and discipline, even in private, your brain begins strengthening the identity of someone who values integrity. Your actions and your self-image start aligning, but the opposite can also happen. When someone repeatedly justifies small dishonest choices because no one will notice, those actions quietly reshape how they see themselves. The standards begin to shift. What once felt unacceptable slowly becomes normal. People with a high-value mindset understand this long-term effect. They know that character is not built during moments of public recognition. It is built during quiet moments when there is no audience at all. That is why they maintain the same standards in private that they display in public. Not because someone might eventually find out, but because their values are not dependent on observation. This mindset creates a powerful form of internal stability. When your actions consistently reflect your principles, you do not need to constantly manage your image or worry about contradictions between who you claim to be and how you behave. Your behavior becomes predictable because it is guided by clear values rather than convenience. There is also a practical advantage to integrity that many people overlook. Trust is one of the most valuable currencies in relationships, business, and leadership. People who consistently act with honesty develop reputations that open doors over time. But those reputations are not built through occasional displays of good behavior. They are built through years of consistent choices. And consistency only happens when integrity exists even in private. Imagine someone who works with the same level of care, whether their work will be closely reviewed or not. Over time, their reliability becomes obvious. People begin trusting their judgment and depending on their work. Opportunities often follow that trust. High-value individuals do not treat integrity as a performance. They treat it as a personal standard that remains constant regardless of the situation, because they understand that the person you are when no one is watching eventually shapes the life you build when everyone is looking. Being comfortable with solitude and self-reflection. Most people try to avoid being alone with their thoughts. The moment silence appears, something quickly fills the space. A phone is picked up, music starts playing. A video begins running in the background. Even during small pauses in the day, many people reach for some form of distraction. At first, this habit feels normal. Modern life is filled with constant stimulation, and it often seems harmless to stay entertained or occupied every moment. But there is a deeper reason why people rush to fill silence. Being alone with your thoughts can feel uncomfortable. When external noise disappears, the mind begins surfacing questions, emotions, and ideas that are easy to ignore during busy days. Doubts appear. Unresolved problems come into focus. Thoughts about the future begin forming. For some people, that quiet space feels overwhelming, so they avoid it. But people with a high-value mindset approach solitude very differently. Instead of escaping it, they intentionally create time for it, because solitude offers something that constant distraction cannot provide. Clarity. When the mind is not reacting to endless streams of information, it begins organizing thoughts more deeply. Problems that once felt confusing become easier to analyze. Ideas that were scattered start connecting with each other. Psychologists often describe this process as reflective thinking. It is the ability to step back from constant activity and observe your own thoughts, behaviors, and decisions. This type of thinking plays an important role in personal growth because it allows someone to learn from their experiences rather than simply moving past them. Without reflection, life becomes a sequence of events with very little understanding attached. High-value individuals use solitude as a space for that understanding. During quiet moments, they review their actions and decisions. What went well today? What could be improved? What patterns are appearing in their habits? These questions may seem simple, but they allow someone to adjust their behavior with intention. Over time, this creates steady improvement. Solitude also strengthens self-awareness. When you spend time observing your own thoughts, you begin recognizing emotional patterns more clearly. You notice what situations trigger frustration, what environments increase your focus, and what habits support your well-being. This awareness makes future decisions easier because you understand yourself better. Neuroscience even suggests that the brain uses quiet moments to process experiences more effectively. When the mind enters a calm state without external demands, a network in the brain known as the default mode network becomes active. This network helps with introspection, memory processing, and connecting past experiences with future plans. In simple terms, the brain uses solitude to make sense of life. But if someone constantly fills every moment with stimulation, that processing time disappears. Another important benefit of solitude is emotional independence. When a person becomes comfortable being alone, their sense of stability no longer depends entirely on external validation or constant social interaction. They can enjoy the presence of others without feeling incomplete when they are by themselves. This balance creates stronger relationships because interactions become a choice rather than a necessity. People who are comfortable with solitude also tend to think more independently. Instead of constantly absorbing the opinions of others, they take time to evaluate ideas on their own. This often leads to clearer values and stronger personal direction. Of course, solitude does not mean isolation from the world. Human connection remains important, but the ability to step away from noise and spend time in quiet reflection gives the mind space to reset, analyze, and grow. And individuals who embrace that quiet space often develop a deeper understanding of both themselves and the life they are building. Appreciating what you have while still aiming higher. There is a quiet tension that many people experience when they start chasing bigger goals. On one side, there is ambition, the desire to grow, improve, achieve more, and build a better future. On the other side, there is appreciation for what already exists in their life. For many people, these two forces start to feel like opposites. They believe that if they slow down and appreciate what they already have, they will lose their drive. And if they keep pushing forward with ambition, they cannot allow themselves to feel satisfied yet, so they choose one extreme. Some people become endlessly restless. They chase the next achievement, the next milestone, the next upgrade in their life. Even when they accomplish something meaningful, the satisfaction lasts only briefly before their mind shifts to the next target. Nothing ever feels like enough. Other people move in the opposite direction. They focus on comfort and contentment, telling themselves that ambition is unnecessary. Growth slows down because they become too attached to the safety of what they already have. Both extremes quietly create problems. Constant dissatisfaction can lead to burnout and frustration because the mind never feels fulfilled. Complete comfort can lead to stagnation because progress stops feeling necessary. People with a high-value mindset learn how to hold both perspectives at the same time. They appreciate what they have while still aiming higher. This balance may sound simple, but it changes how someone experiences their entire journey. Appreciation grounds you in the present moment. It reminds you that the life you have today contains things that once felt like distant goals. Think about how many things in your current life were once hopes or dreams. Skills you did not have yet, opportunities that seemed far away, stability you were still working toward. When people pause to recognize this, something important happens. Gratitude shifts the mind from scarcity to awareness. Instead of constantly feeling behind, you begin recognizing the progress that already exists. Psychologists often connect this feeling with improved mental well-being. Research consistently shows that practicing gratitude strengthens positive emotions and reduces stress. When the brain acknowledges what is going well, it balances the natural tendency to focus only on problems. But appreciation does not have to weaken ambition. In fact, it can strengthen it. When someone recognizes how far they have come, their confidence grows. They see proof that effort creates results. That belief makes future goals feel more achievable rather than overwhelming. Ambition then becomes a continuation of progress instead of a desperate attempt to fill a void. High-value individuals understand that satisfaction and ambition can work together rather than against each other. They take time to acknowledge the good things already present in their life. relationships that support them, skills they worked hard to develop, experiences that shape their perspective, but they also maintain a vision for where they want to go next. This mindset creates a healthier relationship with success. Achievements are celebrated instead of immediately dismissed. Progress feels meaningful rather than invisible. At the same time, ambition continues guiding their actions toward new possibilities. Imagine climbing a long mountain trail. If you only focus on the distance left to climb, the journey feels exhausting. But if you occasionally turn around and see how far you have already come, the effort begins to feel worthwhile. The path ahead still matters, but the ground you have already covered deserves recognition too. People who master this balance often experience both fulfillment and motivation at the same time. They are grateful for the present, yet excited about the future they are still building.